Hello and welcome to the Intentional Brief, your weekly video update on the one big thing in cybersecurity news for middle market companies, their investors, and executive teams. I'm your host, Shay Colson, managing partner at Intentional Cybersecurity, and you can find us online at intentionalcyber.com. Today is Wednesday, February 19th, and we are coming back into another short week-long weekend with President's Day here in the US and Family Day up in British Columbia here on Monday. And we're going to continue the theme this week of humans in the security loop, but instead of looking at the humans on the front line, we're going to look at the humans in that leadership role and dive right into that conversation. We saw news last week that President Trump has nominated Sean Cairncross to be the U.S. National Cyber Director, a relatively new office created by Congress in 2021 and existing as a part of the Executive Office of the President, nominally designed to advise the President on cybersecurity policy and strategy at the national level. And because this is a relatively new role for the government, Cairncross would be the only third full-time director to hold the role. There have been, of course, interim directors that are common during times of transition. But one thing that stands out to me isn't what Cairncross has done in his background, but what he hasn't done, which apparently is cyber. He's held leadership roles in other organizations and worked in an advisory capacity to a fair number of organizations that are nominally technological, but it doesn't appear that he's ever held hands-on cyber roles or worked in a role where he owned or was responsible for the cyber function at an organizational level. And this stands out to me in contrast to the previous person to hold the role, Harry Coker, who's a Naval Academy graduate and spent his time in the Navy as both a surface warfare officer and then as an engineering duty officer, overseeing the communications technology for the ship or submarine that they were stationed on. From there, he spent his career in the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology for 17 years before leaving to become the executive director of the National Security Agency from 2017 to 2019. So obviously has some exposure to this sort of role. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the role of a security leader is often, I think, a curious one, a particular one. We're transitioning out of the time where the only senior folks with cyber experience cut their teeth in either military or law enforcement, because those were the places that had cyber functions and where hands-on exposure to the work was more common. And we're bringing some new backgrounds to these senior roles. But that said, I think the most important part of this role is to sit at the decision-making table, but not sit alongside IT or operations or finance or other business considerations as it's often painted, but rather to sit across from them and provide a necessary tension in this decision-making process. Really, the role of the security leader at this level is to help make risk-informed decisions and bring this element of risk with some clarity. I think often we can see security roles dismissed as kind of the department of no, and we've seen a reframing lately of the CISO role to look more and more like a typical C-suite executive role. But I think that misses the point, and I think it makes this role less effective. This role actually functions more similarly to the way a CFO might function, providing both some data and some guidance about the implications of a decision, be it an acquisition, an expansion, a contraction, a correction, or other business imperative. The role of the security leader isn't, in fact, to align with the business in these discussions. It's to provide that necessary tension that can drive growth. Understanding this as it is a little counterintuitive and seems to be contra to how you might expect these roles to function is actually critical, as the least effective security leader is a prototypical yes man, or someone who's going to go along with the notions of the group without providing that tension at those critical decision-making moments. It takes a particular type of person to succeed in these roles, as you don't make very many friends holding this position at the table day in and day out, but you can make material impacts for your organization. And if that tension isn't there, if that opportunity for growth through that exploration is missed, not only does the leader fail to reach their potential for impact, so too does the entire organization, which is why when we see this lack of experience and exposure at these highest levels, it certainly gives me pause, and I offer it here as a way to think about the security leadership role in your own organizations. Is the person in that role the person that you want? Do they have both the kind of technical and exposure from an experience perspective capabilities, but also the temperament and willingness to sit in that position of discomfort and provide that tension? If they cut their teeth from one of the functions within the business, are they going to be able to separate themselves from that background and provide that critical perspective in the moment? These are the decisions you need to make when choosing that leader. And if you don't have that person, how do you get that capability, that perspective at that table when you need it? Because that is the important time of when it is brought to bear. If you bring it to the table late, or if you try and bolt it on after the decision has been made, you've missed your opportunity for that real value creation. So we'll leave that there for this week and continue on with probably back to ransomware next week, but we shall see. Fundraising. From a fundraising perspective, we eclipsed last week's number of $20 billion by putting up more than $23.1 billion in newly committed capital this week, led by two funds. One, a huge raise from Oaktree Capital Management, who put up $16 billion for their 12th flagship fund, and PSG, who raised not only $6 billion for their 6th flagship fund, but also an additional $2 billion for a new continuation fund that will cover 6 of their portfolio companies. We also saw some quiet news early this week from Insight Partners, actually about Insight Partners, not really from them. Again, as a reminder, who have about $90 billion in assets under management, who suffered a cyber attack that they're calling a sophisticated social engineering attack. I might read that as phishing, but we shall see. Details are forthcoming, of course, and we may talk more about this next week, but I think it's important for our context because Insight is an investor in a significant number of industry-leading cybersecurity companies. So their portcos include companies like Wiz, Island, SentinelOne, Veeam, Abnormal Security, Corelight, Delinea, No Name, and Prevalent. So to have a breach that impacts someone who owns a piece of all of these companies could be pretty significant, but the details, again, are a little scarce at this point. You can find links to all the articles we covered in the comment section below. You can find back issues and written transcripts of these videos at intentionalcyber.com, and we will see you next week for another edition of the Intentional Brief.